So for the first time ever, flag football is going to be in the Olympics in LA 2028. So we're very excited about that. And we've been waiting for this moment since USA Football's inception. It's really been something that we've been working towards as a governing body, and now it's reality.
That was Jamie Riley, Chief Operating Officer for USA Football, talking about how her organization is working hard to increase exposure, inclusivity, and access to the sport of flag football in preparation for their debut in the 2028 LA Olympics. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Jamie, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Freedom Forum. As you know, this year I've been conversing with forces behind the numerous professional sports organizations in central Indiana, in Indianapolis, and in the state of Indiana, like USA Football, in recognition of all the major sports events that we've been having in our state, specifically this year. However, before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming the Chief Operating Officer for USA Football?
Thank you for having me. My name is Jamie Riley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for USA Football. My education, I have a degree from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, in public relations. I never actually practiced public relations, always been marketing and brand, and now, which has led me to operational background. Really just the skill sets that I think that I have adopted across my entire career have led me to where I am. Also, being raised by a single mom also contributed to a lot of who I am today.
So let's talk about your background a bit. You mentioned you never really practiced PR, right? But you've been in the comms marketing industry. And I appreciate that women, quite frankly, in all industries, no matter what that may be, face their own unique challenges regarding, institutional biases or barriers or challenges, particularly as it relates to their advancement in an organization or a corporate organization. As a woman in sports, and football of all the sports, right? I mean, which is known to be considered one of the most masculine and even maybe brutal if you want to go there. But being a woman in sport, what has been your experience in ascending to leadership? And what have you found to be particular strengths that you bring to your teams as you lead?
I think being a female in sports is challenging in general, but I've always just made sure that I stayed focused on what I needed to do. I think being a female in sports, your competence level is challenged a lot. I'm 5'2", about 115 pounds, blonde. I don't scream football to people, and that's okay because I'm not a football person, but I have some strong skill sets that have given me the ability and the focus to get to where I am. And that's where I think really matters, as long as you're believing in yourself and you don't let people doubt you and you continue to prove it with action versus words. And that's been most important for me. But definitely female in sports has been challenging, but I've been lucky to have a good support system, both within the organization, but also with my boss to help provide those opportunities to us and me as well.
Yeah. So again, I started at your current role in sports, but I do want to talk about your PR, communications and marketing background, because I want to know what transferable skills did you learn in that time, even if you weren't specifically practicing public relations, but were more on the comms or marketing side of things that really equipped you or were transferable to your current role. And then tell me two of the biggest lessons that you learned during that time, particularly as related to dealing with people and business, that you really have gleaned from that time that you've brought over to your current role.
Within the communications and PR background, I think what I learned the most was words are very important. And communication doesn't happen until it's understood. So I may be trying to tell you something or communicating something to you, but how you are interpreting it, I have no idea. And so one of the biggest lessons is to make sure that both parties leave the virtual table, if you will, on the same page and they understand where both of you are coming from. That has been a critical thing throughout my entire career, not just in PR, but also moving forward into operations. Majority of my job is to make sure that our teams are successful and they have what they need to be successful. And that's a lot of the back operations, and communication is critical. having a proactive approach to communicating, having a proactive approach to identifying potential issues or successes has been one of the things that I've always taken from career to career, that you can't be reactionary. You have to be proactive. And the more that you are doing that, the more that your team is successful.
I know just in working with teams, working in leadership, that communication, working in relationships is often one of the biggest challenges, right? And that is where diversity often is demonstrated. And oftentimes people from different backgrounds or different histories or traditions may not necessarily, to your point, interpret the same thing the same way. And so communication gets lost. How have you really been able to utilize your background in communication, particularly as you build diverse teams in USA football, which I know may be a challenge in and of itself?
I haven't found it to be too challenging, simply because if you have the skill sets, you have the skill sets, and it shouldn't matter your background and where you come from or what you believe in. So I think really for me, it's being intentional in learning about your employees and or potential employees, what makes them tick. What are their triggers? We're very intentional once an employee comes on board that we understand their personality profile and how they like to communicate. Some of the things that we put into place that help me personally from an operations standpoint, but the team at large, is a how to work with me guide. We're all virtual. And so again, it goes back to communication and understanding one another, especially being in a virtual environment.
We are learning, I think, as we come back from the pandemic, those of us who are becoming more and more in person, that communication can be very, very challenging in a virtual environment, particularly when you're working with people that you don't necessarily know and you're just beginning to know. Tell me some of the challenges you may have experienced, or just straight up barriers have you had to overcome in order to be able to not just be in the position you are today, but also be able to personify and exemplify that these opportunities are available for potentially younger women who may be looking at you as a role model. What are some of the barriers that you would encourage someone coming after you that, look, you can do it, but be prepared for X?
Being comfortable enough to put things in check when those microaggressions are presented to yourself. I personally don't care what your title is or where you are in life. You should feel empowered to put that in check and deal with that situation within the confines of what you have control of. I think that's one thing in my former, life that I wasn't always confident in doing that. Nobody ever showed me that that was okay, because it was more of a male-dominated industry across my entire career, not just within sports. And I think having the confidence to be able to speak up for yourself in a respectful way and understanding that nobody's going to advocate for yourself but you. And I think it's critically important, and not everybody has the confidence in themselves to do that. And that's a learned skill. And surrounding yourself with women and or others that motivate you and have those skill sets that you can lean into and learn from and have those examples to really lean into when you're in those vulnerable moments.
Can we talk about that a little bit more? Because I think as I've gotten a bit older, right, a lot of that confidence comes with wisdom and age, right? But we've got some emerging leaders who are in their 20s and 30s. So how do you begin to build that confidence? And you mentioned briefly, and I'd like for you to expound on it a bit, and often that confidence comes in circling yourself with other women or other people, whoever that may be, who are sponsors, mentors, champions, who can continue to build you and guide you up.
What I did for my own self and career, it wasn't necessarily always going out and seeking to having mentors. I actually have only had one or two, and it was a male. And so it wasn't necessarily a female. I just leaned into what I was, learning from him. But more importantly, what I would tell anybody, and I always do, is raise your hand for that challenging opportunity, whatever it may be. People always ask me, well, how did you get to where you are? How did you become a COO of USA Football? If you asked me 25 years ago, I would have never said that's what I was going to be. My career is a jungle gym. It's not a ladder. And same thing with skill sets and competencies that you build. Don't be afraid to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, because you're going to come away with that with one or two or three additional skill sets or confidence that you didn't have before. And so in addition to finding mentors and those that inspire you, I think it's putting your foot out there and raising your hand to taking on those challenges, whether they be voluntarily opportunities or, within your business that you're working at. I just think that raising your hand and learning and developing that skill set, it builds the confidence that you may need down the road that you don't even realize that you need.
I think that's awesome because we know change comes whether you're expecting it or not. And when you've been bold enough to kind of step out there and raise your hand for something that you know is kind of a stretch or is going to be a learning curve, you get a little more comfortable, I think, with change. And if you've been with any organization, change is going to come. So I think that also kind of builds those muscles as well. So you and I have just recently met, and I have spoken with several women on this show regarding diversity, equity, inclusion, what's happening in their organizations, what has been happening historically and globally with regard to DE&I, and some of the challenges it's currently facing. And one of the things I continue to come back to, because I'm a scientist turned lawyer, is the data. And the data continues to show that over the last 2 decades or so, that the primary beneficiaries of most of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, programs, etc., particularly in the corporate space, have been white or Caucasian women. Yet so many times when we hear people talk about DE&I, it is absolutely in relation to diverse women or diverse people, and not necessarily white women or even white men who may not just be straight white men. So my thought has always gleaned to, it seems to me there is an extra responsibility for those who have benefited from the initiatives and programs to help those who have not. And so I want to hear about your thoughts in this regard. And particularly from your vantage point, is there any additional responsibility for Caucasian women or white women who have been in some way, maybe not even intentionally or knowing to them, benefited from some diversity initiatives? Because on all metrics, white women count, right? White women count as a diverse group. And so is there a responsibility for the white women who have been blessed enough to ascend to whatever position of power and influence to also make sure that that benefits trickles down to the other women, particularly diverse women, who may not have such benefit? And I say that particularly when I look over the pandemic with all the women who kind of left the workforce, and that was disproportionately women of color or diverse women. So what are your thoughts about that? I've been asking everybody because this is kind of something that I'm intrigued by, and I want to know other people's thoughts.
I think it's a fantastic question. And my answer to that is yes. I think that whether you're a white or black, a female in general, I think you need to reach and extend the arm to the next potential female leader. Yes, the data is showing that, obviously more Caucasian women are in the leadership roles and have benefited from those certain activations. But I do think that as a female and in a leadership role, it is very important for us to help one another and just understand what that means to each person is different. Not everybody defines leadership as being a COO. The next person in line for my job may not want that job. And I think it's just understanding who they are and what they have to bring to the table, but seeking those opportunities out, exposing those opportunities. I personally have not had that challenge. I was raised by a single mother, so that was a struggle that I experienced. Being from a small community, didn't have much opportunity until I got to the city. I didn't realize things were actually accessible to me, and I think that's probably something that others may go through in different situations. And so I would have loved somebody in a leadership role as a female to reach out to me personally, because I didn't even understand that a mentor would do that for me. And so I personally take that to heart, and I think that is responsible of all females, not just Caucasian females.
That's absolutely right. And I'm glad you bring up the point, because notwithstanding that I'm a black female, I'm also from the country. And you mentioned, there are so many issues that affect the rural population just as much as the inner city population that I think we often kind of just conflate and don't appreciate. But that piece, which you mentioned and I talk about all the time, which is exposure, just being exposed to the opportunities that may be available to anyone, not just a female or a black female or a white female, but anyone. And oftentimes I find that those opportunities really fall not by race, but socioeconomic levels. And with regard to rural populations versus city populations, where you have access to clubs and organizations that are forward thinking and thinking about how to bring along folks who may be underrepresented. That's not always the case in rural populations where you just don't have that kind of access. So what did it do for you to come to the city, quote unquote, whatever city that is, I'm assuming it's Indianapolis, and be exposed to things like you could be a COO of USA Football? How did that change your career trajectory in and of itself?
It was eye-opening. I'm being completely honest. My first job was working at Burger King, right? Fast food, small town. That's really the only opportunity you have at a teenager level. Fast forward to college, come to Indianapolis after college, and definitely being exposed to just the types of organizations that are in the city, the types of people, the opportunities, like you said, the clubs. I jumped in head first and I joined every club that I could be a part of that was, transparent to where I was going. So public relations at that time. And so I just think being exposed to different things is not everybody's luxury. I was able to get myself here and take advantage of everything that this beautiful city has to offer. And I'm sure there's much more that I haven't even experienced yet here. I think that's really important, though, that those that are in positions like myself, you get back to the rural or the inner city, wherever the access is limited, and speak out and bring those opportunities. And I feel like a lot of companies still center around the main metropolis and they don't expand beyond it, not because they don't want to, they're just not thinking about that. And I think it's important to think beyond just where you are in your city.
Absolutely. Exposure so important, particularly for career advancement with diverse people, women, anyone. So thank you for mentioning that. Now it's time for a break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with Jamie Riley, Chief Operating Officer for USA Football, on this 2024 Pride Month episode of the Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So I want to shift gears a bit to your actual role now, right? I have interviewed Mel Raines and Allison Barber, and I tell everyone, I have no clue what it takes to run a sports organization. And I really appreciate all the challenges that it may entail to make all the pieces come together and particularly provide an entertainment experience, which ultimately is what everyone's going to see. But will you tell us about your day-to-day, what your day-to-day job entails in running the operations of USA Football? How are you able to, again, influence your team and make positive change for the organization? And then what successes have you had in your role that you're really proud of and would like to tout?
So our main responsibility is athlete safety, first and foremost. And so you mentioned entertainment. Yeah, we are not what you see on Sunday, afternoon during the fall, but we are hoping that those young athletes that are participating at the youth rec level through USA Football enrolled organizations are learning how to play the game the right way. And so that's first and foremost to what we do, is making sure that the athlete health and safety is always considered both on and off the field. As far as my role specifically in the operations background, is to make sure that, like I said, our team have what they need to be successful so that we are constantly thinking about the athlete first. A lot of what we do, we develop a lot of education programs for coach certification to make sure, that they understand what they're doing before they ever step foot on the field, to teach these young children that are starting this beautiful sport of football. But more importantly, I think we also are responsible for being compliant with what is best for that athlete. We are getting ready to become the national governing body from the USOPC. And so there's a lot more standards that we need to be meeting as a football community. And that's going to be a challenge for the football community at large. And so that's our job. That's our challenge. That's our opportunity to bring that to the table and make sure that we are constantly making sure that we are thinking about that athlete first.
Thanks for enlightening us in that regard. So you mentioned, USA Football is not what you see on Sunday, right? So I want you to tell us more about that, because I suspect there are plenty of people out here who that's all the football they ever know, right? So when you say it's not the football you see on Sunday, what exactly do you mean? And when I say that, I mean, tell us about your organization, what it does, what it's seeking to do beyond athlete safety to really grow the sport, grow knowledge about the sport, and more diversify the sport, bring it to more diverse audiences and more diverse fans. Tell us about USA Football in that regard.
So being the national governing body, we pride ourselves on bringing education development opportunities throughout the entire United States. And so one of the biggest things that we challenge ourselves is to be an innovative governing body. And so, yes, we are not the professional Sunday night football that you see, but we are the beginning of what that future Sunday night football player is experiencing right now. We want to make sure that they know how to play the game. They know how to play the game in a safe environment, and they feel comfortable playing that game. And so what we start to do is we create different programs. So we have one that's called the football development model. And that is essentially, you would not put a kid in algebra before they understood math. And so our goal is to make sure that we are meeting the kid where they are, and they are entering the sport at a comfort level where they are, whether it be flag, a modified tackle, or a full-on 11 tackle game format. And so that is something that's true to what we are and core to our mission. We also operate and select the U.S. national team. And so that is from the adult perspective, also junior. So you're 15 to 17U age frame, but we don't own or operate leagues. We work with youth football organizations across the United States, similar to as a silent business partner, to make sure that they have everything that they need, whatever that may be, because no youth football organization is the same, to be successful in their local community. That could be keeping kids off the street. That could be they want to have a competitive program versus just a rec program. That could be help me understand how to create my 501c3. That's what USA Football is here to do, but more importantly, to make sure that they're doing it the right way.
I'm certain that there are plenty of people out here who had no idea that that's what you all do and are responsible for. And I think it would probably settle a lot of people's concerns that there is this organization who is focused at such a young level in making sure that athletes are protected, particularly given what we now know about brain injuries, CTE, those kind of things for football players. So, of course, you're with USA Football. We know that the 2024 Paris Olympics are coming up. And again, I spoke with Max Siegel earlier this year about what's happening with USA Track and Field and their preparations for the Olympics. We are excited in Indianapolis that the Olympic swimming trials will be coming here this month. And that's all super exciting. But I want to know, what is your team doing? What's USA Football doing in order to prepare for the Paris Olympics, particularly as it relates to the presence of tackle and flag football? And then I think you have some pretty exciting news as related to the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, and I'd love it if you could share some of that with us.
So for the first time ever, flag football is going to be in the Olympics in LA 2028. So we're very excited about that, and we've been waiting for this moment since USA Football's inception. It's really been something that we've been working towards as a governing body, and now it's reality. And so what we've been doing to prepare for it, I just returned from our training camp in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have a partner out there from the United Sports Performance, and we work with them to bring all of our athletes in for 4 or 5 days, from mental to nutrition to training to strength training to everything that these athletes need to be a competitive team. But we just finished that this weekend. We put our rosters down from 18 to 12 on the 15U, 17U, and adult, and we're going to take those teams to compete in Finland in preparation for LA 2028. There's plenty of competitions between now and the Olympics. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's what we are preparing for, to make sure that we are selecting and optimizing the team to have their best performance to hopefully come home with the gold.
So don't look for flag football at Paris, but it will be in LA in 2028. And you are now preparing the teams that will be selected to represent the U.S. in 2028. Is that correct?
We have selections every year. So the players on this 2024 team aren't guaranteed a spot on the 2028 team. They have to try out again, just like every other athlete has to. But they do have the potential to be that generation that's going to be competing for the United States.
So if you are an aspiring flag football player out there who believes that you are good enough to go to the Olympics, and 2028 is going to be your year, how would you even go about signing up, being the person, particularly if you qualify this year, that doesn't get you to 2028. So how do you even prepare yourself or time it properly to make sure that if your goal is to be one of the members that represents U.S. in 2028, that you get on that roster?
Flag football is definitely transitioning from a recreation to a competitive sport. Right now, you probably see it playing at the rec level. And if I were one of those athletes that wanted to compete, I would start preparing now if they haven't already. In order for you to be even considered for a roster seat, you have to try out through USA Football. We have talent IDs that are across the United States. We had 5 this year for this spring and summer, and then next year we'll probably have 8 opportunities. We also scout other sanctioned tournaments throughout the United States through youth football organizations, but there's plenty of opportunities. We also have a digital combine once a year that athletes can upload the tests that they need to do for our scouts to evaluate whether or not they want to be invited to the talent ID.
I'm certain there are plenty of people who have never heard of any of this and are taking notes to make sure that they do what's necessary to potentially be on that first team in 2028. That's really exciting for the sport and for the Olympics, and just to see how all of it is continuing to grow and evolve. So you mentioned how flag football is now going to be, again, in 2028. But how will the inclusion of flag football on the Olympic scale impact its following and fandom? Like, again, I think we're exposing a lot of people to, but of course, there's no bigger stage than the Olympic stage, which I think will clearly put flag football on a different level. So tell us your thoughts there. And also, are there any unique experiences that will be incorporated in the 2028 Olympics, and maybe that's still in the planning, that you're particularly excited about as it relates to, again, growing the diverse fandom and the inclusive fandom of this particular sport?
I think the growth of the fandom has already started. Just kind of speaking to the growth of the game in general, United States, I believe there are 12 states now that have sanctioned high school varsity girls flag football as a varsity sport. NAIA has it at the collegiate level for females, and the NCAA is going to be submitting for an emerging application for flag football for females as well. Internationally, though, the sport is played. There are over 70 member federation at the IFAF, which is the International Federation of American Football, which is the international governing body. So there are already competitive levels at the international level, which obviously when we go to Olympics, we'll be playing against each other. But it's already starting. And with the help of and support of the NFL as well, they're a good partner of ours. Like, that is something that they are expanding into as well. They just opened up an academy in Australia, which the next Olympics is in Brisbane. So I think that they're hoping too that this helps the growth in the fandom of the sport in general, whether it be flag or tackle. There's also data from the Sports Fitness and Industry Association that shows that the year after a sport is in the Olympics, there's a big bump in participation. So we're really hoping that not only now what we're seeing in the growth of the sport, but it'll continue to happen post LA 2028.
Yeah, it's the biggest stage in the world. So I can fully appreciate why you see that increase right after any sport's been introduced to the Olympics. So again, as we begin to wrap up, I'd like to just ask you, what would you want our listeners to take away with regard to their knowledge or appreciation of what USA Football is currently doing, or even the long-term plan on what you would envision USA Football to be doing in the next 10 to 20 years, as we're already seeing such a increase in involvement and fandom and following, etc.?
I think what's most important for us is this sport has changed so much. You mentioned injuries and CTE, but there's been so many advancements in this sport, both from a technology to the training to the certification to the tools used. And I think just understanding that and educating yourself, reaching out to USA Football, that's what we're here for, is to serve and support youth football organizations at large. But more importantly, those that may be on the fence about putting their child in the sport, there's so many opportunities that isn't your traditional route that USA Football has worked very hard to establish. We also do grant programs that help underserved communities as well as across the United States that we give up to $2 million a year away to youth organizations to really bring access to this wonderful sport of football. And so I think it's just re-educating yourself on what the sport is about today versus what it was 20 years ago.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a whole industry that has been dedicated to making sure football is safer, that our children aren't growing up to be adults with issues or neural issues because they've played the sport that they love for so long. And I think that's a great segue to finally ask you your thoughts around Indiana generally. So you mentioned you came to Indiana, and so you've seen, like I've seen, the evolution of the city, the corporations in the city, the organizations in the city. And so I'd like to ask you, as I do all my guests, as a kind of a final question, what do you see have been some of the greatest improvements Indiana has made, and Indianapolis in particular, with regard to becoming a more diverse and inclusive environment and community, and corporate communities that have also allowed diversity to really thrive? And then what are 2 or 3 tools or tips or resources you would advise any senior level leader who's really looking to continue to diversify its workplace, its executive levels, and make sure that all people are welcome in their organization and can advance at their rate as they see fit?
I can speak to all organizations in Indiana. I can speak to the sports community. I was just on a speaking engagement with the Indiana Sports Corporation, and just seeing the amount of impact of what they've been able to do to bring sports to this wonderful city, not only from a corporate level, but just from an event level. I'm a little biased, but I think sports is the number one thing that brings people together with no barriers as much as possible. And so Indiana's commitment to sport and driving economics through sport, I think by default will translate into more opportunity for diverse communities. As far as 2 to 3 things I think leadership or corporate can do, we like to make sure that we are training our staff very organically on different things that they may not be aware of. And so that we are committed to training our staff on different things through different avenues. We have panels, we have online training. We also ensure that we have a committed staff to our DE&I efforts. It's optional, it's not required, but we do have a committee on staff that we make sure that we are listening to each other and we are putting practices in place. What I always like to say, it's not words on paper. We're actually operationalizing what we say and through our behaviors. And so that's something very important, I think, that every leader should take a note from. You can put anything down on paper, but until you start living it and operationalizing it, it doesn't mean anything to you or your staff.
I think those are awesome tips. I really like the operationalizing it, being actionable about what you're saying, particularly as we're coming up on the 4th and 5th year since George Floyd. We've seen a lot of the rhetoric and the language that was so prominent several years ago kind of piddle off, and there's not been a lot of action or people following up on action. So I think that's really important that at the end of the day, you can say anything. People are going to actually believe what they see you doing, right?
And the depth doesn't have to be a bunch. Just pick 1 or 2 things and do it really well and be committed to it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jamie, I thank you so much for being here. I thank you for sharing your thoughts. I thank you for being such an amazing leader and a diverse leader in a sports organization that I know is still thriving to get more and more diversity and inclusion in the sport. But thank you for your leadership, and particularly thank you for being on the Freedom Forum this month.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you again to Jamie Riley. And thanks to you for joining us on this 35th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.